Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and let's make 8 half-square triangles from 1 square of fabric. Now we're going to need to do a little math, but I have a formula that is really easy to do. A half-square triangle is a square that consists of 2 triangles. A finished square is a ½ inch smaller than the cut square because we need that 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So for this example, this is a 4½ inch half square triangle. When it's all stitched together, it will equal 4 inches. To get 8 from 1 square, we need to do a little math because we're going to do some stitching, and then we get to cut them apart into all of these triangles, which when these triangles open up, we have the half square triangles. The simplest way to do the math is to take the finished size that you want and add 1.5 inches. So in this case, I want a 4-inch finished square. So I'm going to add 1.5 inches, which gives me 5½ inches. When I have these blocks together, this edge now becomes 11 inches. So I would need an 11-inch block. When these are stitched and cut, I am going to have a generous 4½ inch block that I can trim down. So let's start right from the beginning. My finished block is going to be 4 inches, so I'm adding 1.5 inches, which gets me to 5½, and I'm multiplying that by 2, which gives me 11 inches. So I have an 11-inch square. It won't matter what size square we want, we need to add that 1.5 inches to that math and times it by 2. For example, if this was going to be a 10-inch finished block, I will need to add the 1.5 inches, which gives me 11½ inches, times it by 2, 23 inches. And that's how big the square would be. From here, we're going to do some sewing lines and some cutting lines. Our first stitching lines are going to go from corner to corner. So we need to draw a big X in that square. Go right from corner to corner. So I have a big X. I need to draw 2 more lines, and they don't need to be full lines because they are going to be cutting marks. And the lines need to go from center to center. I'm going to be able to use the center point as a guide and a straight line on my ruler. I just need to put a little mark up at the top, one through the center, and another one up at the top. And do that for both edges. I need the center line and the 2 sides done. So I'm going to have this sort of star shape in the center. From here, I get to take it to the machine and stitch 1/4 inch on each of those lines going from corner to corner. So I'll have 2 rows of stitching going in one direction and 2 rows going in the other direction. Those second lines, we don't need to stitch on them. Those 4 lines of stitching are all the stitching we're going to need. We get to cut this apart. There are 2 different ways we can cut it apart. And having those extra lines on the corner and the center will help. So it won't matter what lines you cut first. We have our markings. We can cut corner to corner first, or we can cut our center lines first. I'm going to do corner to corner and show you why these extra marks are very helpful. Once we have those 2 cuts done from corner to corner, in a perfect world, this fabric's going to stay together. We will do 2 additional cuts, cutting the block in half. But most times, the fabric will shift a little bit and we'll have to put it back together in order to cut it. But having these additional marks on the ends and in the center, it won't matter if those blocks come apart. I can see where my threads have an intersection right there at that point. However, sometimes with the thread matching so well, it's a little hard to see. So I do have that extra line as a guide. When we come to the other end, it needs to be in the center. And there's no way of knowing where that center mark is unless you follow a marking on your ruler or you have that handy mark. So I find having those extra lines, it's just an extra security for me. So if these shift, it won't matter. And I can do it one at a time and cut. This is a fail-proof way of finding those center marks. And not only that, I can shift my fabric. I don't need to try to shift my board. I can just bring this to a comfortable spot, line up my ruler and cut. Move those out of the way, bring my next piece to be cut. There's no rotating that needs to be done this way. I now have all of my 8 triangles cut, which will turn into half square triangles. Now these half square triangles are a little bit big, so we can trim them down. And we can trim them down with a square ruler. I do like to have a square ruler that has a line that goes from point to point. And that way I'm going to be able to use that line to line it up along the edge. I want to cut this block to 4.5 inches, and I do have an extra 1/2 inch that I'm going to be able to trim off. And that's going to leave these blocks perfect. So I can straighten up my first edge as long as I know that the marks on the ruler are larger than the block I need. And in this case, it's larger than my 4.5 inches. And trim off those first 2 edges. From here, I can rotate this block, line up the cut edge to the size that you need. The cut edge is sitting at the 4.5 inch mark. That straight line going from corner to corner is following right along that edge. Now I can trim off the extra. Now I have my perfect 4.5 inch half square triangle. And I can do that to all 8 of my half square triangles. Adding that extra 1.5 inches gives us a little bit of trimming space. It also gives us room if our seam allowance is not perfect. And when we trim them down, we also clean up the edges. So adding that 1.5 inches and multiplying it by 2 is all the math we need to know. So that's definitely an easy way to do 8 half square triangles from 1 square. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.